Hi, my name is Chris Ward, and I'm here to present to you a case study on a celiac and lactose intolerant client's dietary intake and how they fit in with the rest of Australia and the current nutritional guidelines. In the following presentation, we will cover the issues encountered, collecting the information along with the positives and negatives of the selected assessments. We will then discuss how the client compares to the Australian dietary and anthropometric guidelines and put forward any recommendations that will bring the client in line with the guidelines for their current stage of life. The client is 33 years old. She's married and presently has no children, but is looking to start a family in the near future. She is very active, participating in both indoor and outdoor soccer, along with resistance training up to 6 days per week. The client has been medically diagnosed as a celiac and is also lactose intolerant, which will play a significant role in her daily intake as it requires the client to adhere to a strict gluten and dairy-free diet permanently. Approximately 1 in 70 Australians are affected by celiac disease, a condition where the villi in the bowel become inflamed due to the immune system reacting to gluten, and if not managed correctly can lead to long-term health issues including chronic inflammation and the malabsorption of nutrients. Lactose intolerance is the inability to digest lactose, which is the main carbohydrate or sugar found in dairy products, and has a high incidence in Caucasians with 1 in 20 affected, leading to stomach cramps, bloating, and diarrhea if not managed correctly. Lastly, the client presently weighs 73 kilos, is 160 centimeters tall, and has a waist circumference of 73.5 centimeters, all of which will play a role in their body mass index, which we will discuss shortly. So the client was required to participate in 2 dietary assessments, a 24-hour recall and a 3-day food record, both of which presented minor challenges for myself and the client. With the use of the phases set out by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, I conducted a face-to-face interview for the 24-hour recall, which involves multiple passes to extract all the information, starting from a quick list of food and beverages. Forgotten foods were then taken into account, the time consumed, details of the food consumed, and a final pass to ensure the client had not forgotten any details. The 3-day food record required the client to fill out her dietary intake on a Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday to ensure there was an even spread of variability. The time, food or drink description, amount consumed, and any other additional details such as a brand are instructed to be recorded on the specified days. The client's overall diet is extremely structured, which was demonstrated within the 2 dietary assessments that displayed little variability over the selected days. Even with the weekend taken into account for the 3-day record, there was no major changes in the diet. This is not to say that the client's diet does not stray, as the assessment was only a snapshot and had a longer period of recording been employed, there may well have been a wider variety of food in rotation. When interviewed regarding these findings, the client stated multiple factors that influence why her diet doesn't vary much on a day-to-day basis. These include her food sensitivities, with all meals being prepared at home to avoid cross-contamination and the ability to be able to check the ingredients being used. Time was also an issue, as not a lot of time was spent at home due to work, social and sporting commitments, so most meals were prepared at the start of the week and made in bulk to save time. Energy requirements were also a major factor due to the demand of physical activity performed during the week, which can be up to 90 minutes per day, 6 days per week. The client explained that her diet was a lot of trial and error, and when it came to food selection, as certain foods would not keep her full, which in turn would affect her day and performance when training or competing. When we looked at the issues, forgotten foods were found to be the biggest hurdle for the client, but with the use of probing for minor details, we were able to overcome this. An individual's memory is a limiting factor when attempting to recall their daily food intake, which is a known issue encountered among health professionals. Fortunately, the client's overall diet was prepared by herself, and the foods and drinks she consumed had little variation throughout her current stage of life. Examples include having to jog the client's memory for minor extras to her morning tea and lunchtime meals, such as the addition of avocado, or the multiple cups of tea during the day and whether they be regular or decaffeinated. Identifying the amount of milk consumed at night was also required probing to discover if a glass or mug was used and the size of it. Due to a limited practice in applying 24-hour food recall, The probing for details the probing for details did require some time in extracting the information from the client. Although the client's structured dietary intake did make the process easier than that of a person who is inconsistent with their diet or does not place it as a high priority, details such as size of fruit consumed, how much milk was used in the tea, and what is in the homemade sauce for dinner required time to work through with the client, all of which is not uncommon when using this type of assessment. The food record completed by the client over the course of the 3 days, a Monday, Wednesday, Sunday, lacked in detail when compared to the 24-hour recall. When discussed with the client about the challenges they faced recording their food over the 3 days, a lack of instructions may have led to the decline in detail. Due to the client's busy work schedule, the days were generally filled out in the evening and relied on memory for minor details such as the ones encountered in the 24-hour recall. A greater burden is placed on the client to record what they are consuming, and the required motivation may not be present to achieve this for certain individuals, as stated in current literature regarding the use of dietary assessments. Taking into account the 24-hour recall administered by myself and the 3-day food record completed by the client, the following recommendations have been suggested to enhance the quality of future assessments. First and foremost, the interviewer requires further practice in delivering the questions to become more time efficient and be able to extract information required in a more concise manner. This requires time and the ability to learn questions that aid the client in remembering the finer details of their dietary intake. The 3-day food record places more onus on the individual and requires more buy-in, which in turn can increase the effort placed in recording their diet. The person administering the 3-day food record would need to educate the individual on why it is important the information they provide isn't going to be used against them, but to help them improve their health. Finally, for an individual who has a regimented diet, a longer-term dietary assessment may be required to evaluate whether they continue to meet the guidelines during periods where their routine may not be as structured, such as traveling for work or social events. As for the dietary assessments as a whole, they both have their strengths and weaknesses that have been documented in recent literature. The 24-hour food recall has shown to produce detailed data, but this is reliant on the interviewer and how they approach the questioning to be able to gain the relevant information. By removing the barrier of information gathering from the client and placing only the need to supply it to the interviewee, this can help reduce errors and increase the detail of information through probing when done correctly. The downside of this process is it can become time-consuming and tedious for the client if the questions are too vague or aren't explained well enough for the client to interpret. The 3-day food record, on the other hand, removes the need for an interviewer, which can be seen as a positive if the initial instructions are comprehensive and concise to reduce the errors that may occur during reporting. This can also be seen as a negative for those with low literacy skills, as they may have trouble comprehending the instructions and recording the data. The 3-day food record provides a larger snapshot of a client's diet when compared to the 24-hour food recall, including the ability to take in a weekday and weekend, but this can be time-consuming for someone who has trouble remembering what they ate at the end of the day, and they are required to fill it out as they go each day to ensure the information they provide is as accurate as possible. Now, as we look to analyze the data from the food assessments, we require a standard to compare them with. The Australian Dietary Guidelines provide us with this information, and the serving sizes I refer to are related to the women aged between 19 and 50, of which is the demographic that my client falls in. Serving sizes can be confusing, so as we progress through the following slides, I will break down what a serving size would look like in practical terms and how much the client is currently eating and any recommendations they may be required to meet the guidelines. The 6 servings of grain foods a day are recommended for my client. This amounts to 500 kilojoules per serve, or a slice of bread, half a cup of cooked rice, or a quarter of a cup of muesli. Being a celiac requires careful planning regarding the grain types that can be consumed to avoid a reaction that involves severe stomach pain and vomiting. Therefore, any products containing gluten need to be avoided, which is why the client's grain selection is limited. However, my client meets the needs of this guideline with the food presented in the table. Brown rice makes up the largest portion of grain foods for the client, which are consumed during lunch and dinner, with gluten-free muesli for breakfast. The rice cakes and oat bars are used as snacks throughout the day to maintain a feeling of fullness and between the meals. Next, we have vegetables, where the guidelines recommend 5 daily servings, which is equal to approximately 75 grams per serve. As previously mentioned, time is the biggest challenge for the client, and the preparation of meals are made at the start of the week. To avoid food wastage, the client uses frozen steamed vegetables for lunch and dinner, which in total equal 4 servings a day, accompanied by half a medium tomato with her morning tea each day. A leafy salad was used as an alternative to vegetables on the weekend. When recorded in the 3-day food record, when compared to the guidelines, the client looks to be on par with dietary intake. If required, the client may look at adding half a cup of canned beans to her lunch or dinners, and this will place her above the recommended dietary intake for the day. Fruit only requires 2 servings, which will be approximately a medium-sized piece of fruit, either a banana, apple, or orange, with the client going above and beyond the guidelines, consuming both an orange and a banana and half an avocado a day. Lean meats are vital for the client's athletic performance and the maintenance of muscle mass, which is why she sits above the daily recommended intake and also supplements with whey protein. The guidelines state that 2.5 servings is sufficient, with the client exceeding this amount. 80 grams of chicken breast or 100 grams of tuna constitute a serving in this instance. One recommendation I would make is to incorporate red meat into a diet to maintain iron levels. And whilst I suggested eggs as another alternative to protein, the client explained that eggs make her nauseated and was informed by a doctor that this may be a byproduct of being a celiac. The dietary guidelines recommended 2.5 servings of dairy, amounting to 250 ml of milk or 200 grams of yogurt, which presented a challenge for the client being lactose intolerant. Although there are now lactose-free products available, the cost can be up to twice as much as regular products on the market, meaning it is not financially viable. The client is aware that she may not meet these guidelines for dairy and uses a calcium supplement to counteract some of the effects of missing out on these guidelines. Lastly, there were minimal discretionary foods noted for the dietary assessments, with only a 25 gram piece of dark chocolate every night, whether it be weekday or weekend. The guidelines state between 0 to 2 point serves per day, or approximately 600 kilojoules. They also state that active people or taller people do have more leeway when it comes to discretionary food, although they do recommend still keeping it to a minimum. So up next, we'll look at the client's anthropometric measurements and how they compare to the current guidelines. As discussed at the start of the presentation, the client weighs 73 kilos, is 160 centimeters tall, and has a waist circumference of 73.5 centimeters. When her body mass index, or BMI, is calculated, the client fell into the range of being overweight. However, when her waist measurements were taken into account, the client was well below the recommended waist circumference cutoff of greater than 80 centimeters outlined by the World Health Organization. The presence of higher than normal lean body tissue in the client can be attributed to the overweight classification for BMI, which is why the Department of Health states that it is a tool and not a perfect measure. It is just one that is agreed upon to be the most useful and valid for adults as a whole. In conclusion, the client will be considered more of an outlier than the national average when it comes to dietary intake due to the food sensitivities listed and the physical activity performed throughout the week. Personality may also play a role in the diet consumed on a regular basis, as someone who may have the same food allergies and physical activity demands may not like to have the same foods in their diet on a weekly basis and look for regular change, leading to future research that could also assess an individual's personality and how it will impact their diet. Overall, the client meets the guidelines on a regular basis, and the only suggestion would be to incorporate red meat into a diet and consider including more lactose-free dairy to increase the sodium in their dairy consumption. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.